Hello, it's Jo from Minerva. I'm going to be showing you how to use some different gathering techniques today. And to show you this, I have finished making, during the video filming of this, I finished making the Lyra shirt dress. It's got buttons and a collar and tiers. You can have it without tiers or you can have it with tiers. But I thought today I'd show you a few techniques for gathering, because it can be tricky if you're trying to gather a really long piece of fabric. Here are the tiers on this dress. So the first row of gathering comes at the waistline, so that's there. And then I've put a second tier on the bottom. I don't know if you can see that. A second tier on the bottom to take it down to just past my knee length. So I can wear it with boots, I can wear it with sandals, I can wear it with leggings. And it's got lovely floppy pockets. It's a really fabulous fabric. When I finish with my patterns, I like to put them in a plastic pocket. So Lyra is now going to be put away, and inside the packet I put any pieces that I traced off. So I traced off a size 5 bodice for myself, but kept the bodice pieces whole, and I kept the collar pieces whole. And I also made a toile of the top. So I'm not going to throw that away, because that gives me some alterations I did to the dart. So I'm going to keep that all in this packet, so that when I make it again, I won't have to try and remember all those things that I've already altered. There are a few things to prepare before you start gathering. So you want to make sure that you've got a really good quality thread. If you use a moon thread or a cheap thread because you think, well, I'm going to pull that tacking out anyway afterwards, you run the risk of it breaking. So I've got some quilting thread in here, but Gutermann thread would do as well. I'm going to put my machine on a long running stitch. So I can get mine up to 5, but you have to see how far you can get yours. And generally you would put in 2 rows of gathering. And if you only put in 1, you'll get quite a lumpy, bumpy gather that has very deep troughs and big peaks. So when you sew it to your garment, you'll get sort of bits that pop out and bits that fold over. If you put in 2 lines of gathering stitches, you'll get a smoother gather. But on the Lyra pattern, it does actually call for 3 lines of gathering stitches, which means your gathering won't be all within the seam allowance. So I'm going to sew this 3rd line, and then we're going to have a look at what 3 lines of gathering stitches looks like. I've done them a different colour, but my bobbin threads are pink, because you need to pull the bobbin threads to get your gather, and you need to make sure that the other end is secure and your threads won't shoot off the end. And you just keep adjusting your gathers until you can even them out. A little bit of a gap there, move that along a bit. So you should be able to get lots and lots of little pleats rather than just big humps and troughs. And if you keep moving the fabric around, you'll keep getting a better gather. This material gathers really nicely. It's got a viscose in it, so it's draping really well. So that's 3 rows of gathering stitches, but of course your 3rd row is past the seam allowance, so you're going to need to take that one out once you've sewn the tier to the skirt. Another method I've learnt just recently is to make some very strong pulling threads. So this is a crochet cotton like this, but you could use fishing line, or I've seen people use dental floss. And so rather than making a running stitch, you're going to make a zigzag over this slippy pulling thread. When you pull the threads, you'll be pressing all of the zigzag stitches, and that's what will make the gather. It feels a lot more secure because you're pulling on thread that's stronger and it feels less risky than pulling just sewing machine thread. And here it is when you've got all 3 layers, and then you can pull. It's like pulling the strings when you have a new pair of curtains. You're pulling the fabric along those slippy channels, and it feels so much more secure than threads. But there is a disadvantage. You would need all, and it really does give a really good gather. The disadvantage is you can't have anything hanging out of the seam allowance, because you would have a zigzag stitch running through your gathering, and you can't just pull that through like you can pull a stitch length 5 running stitch out of a piece of material. I have just tried to unpick that to see if I could find a quick way to unpick it, but the zigzag stitch just all bunches up. So you would absolutely need to make sure that if you were using these strings that they were all within the seam allowance. But you get such a neat gather with it. Really good method if you're doing a very, very long piece of gathering, which I'm doing on the Lyra dress. Okay, I'm going to sew around the top of my skirt piece. I've added 1 row of the crochet cord. I'm going to add a 2nd row, and I'm going to make sure that I don't go over the seam allowance. So I need to make sure that that's not more than 1.5. I also need to check, and I've made this mistake before, I need to check that I've got enough bobbin to get all the way around, because in gathering it needs to be one continuous gathering run. So if it breaks, that's you back to the beginning again. You need to unpick it and go all the way around. So I don't want to get 3/4 of the way around this skirt piece and then find I've run out of bobbin thread. So I've made sure I've got enough on there, and I'm going to sew all the way around. I'm going to pull it up to gather it, and I'm going to show you how to attach it to the skirt. Okay, threads are drawn up. You can see the zigzag stitch at the back of the threads. Oh, the other good thing about that crochet thread is if you wear glasses, you can really easily see which thread you're supposed to be pulling, so that was really great. So you start by pinning right sides to right sides, putting the skirt and the top together. And I've done a technique which you use when you're making neckbands or putting an elastic waistband. I've quartered it. So I've put the side seams to the side seams and the centre notch to the centre notch in the back. So you've quartered the full circumference of the skirt piece, and then really carefully and adjusting the gathers as you go. Where you've got little blocks of gather, just spread them out, and where you've got a bit of a ball patch, you just keep moving them around. And you need to pin from the gathered side, because that is the side you're going to sew it from. Because if you sew from the other side, you can't tell. Sometimes if you sew from the other side, you can't tell if a little fold like that gets kinked down. Whereas if I'm sewing from this side, I can just keep adjusting with my fingers. So I can make sure that a larger one like this one doesn't get folded down and make a crease, a little pucker on the front. So I'm going to keep working around. It's quite therapeutic. Adjusting the gathers, putting in the pins, and then I need to make sure that when I sew under the machine, I sew here. So this is all enclosed in the seam allowance, because I won't be able to pull out that zigzag stitch. Okay, this is it attached to the skirt, and you can see that actually this is with, you can't feel it, but underneath that is with this seam going behind, going up, and I'm going to press that so that that top piece comes down and up, because if you have the seam rolling the other way behind with the seam going down, it sort of pops all of your gathers up in the air. You want them to be lying flat, so you need to make sure that behind your seam allowance goes up to the top. I'm going to press that. You can see behind, I did it in different colours so that you could see. That's my stitch line, and these are my 2 rows of zigzags. Now to remove the bulk in here, because obviously we've got 2 big threads of crochet thread, you can just pull these right through now. So these can come right out. They're really strong, so you can just pull them, but you don't have to take out the zigzag, because that is part of the inside seam. There we go. It hangs a lot smoother now because it's got less bulk inside. It's not strictly a gathering technique, although I wanted to show you here, if you're putting in a gathered sleeve like this, this is how you get the elastic sleeve on the Lyra. It makes it so much easier if you have it right side out and you sew as if you're sewing inside the shirt. If you have it the other way, you sometimes catch the other side of the sleeve, or you catch a bit. It's just really, really simple to sew with that sleeve opening, allowing you to keep turning this circle round and round and round. So make sure when you sew an elasticated cuff, you have your item right side out, and then you can sew inside the circle. I've attached the first tier, and this is the second tier. I've already measured my skirt length, so when I'm gathering very long pieces like for this dress, I like to hem it first, because once I've got the weight of the skirt all attached to the dress, especially with a viscous material like this, it can be a bit tricky to hem. So while there's less weight in this piece of fabric, I've hemmed it, and then I can use the same gathering technique here and then attach it to the final dress. Don't forget to make a profile on Minerva so that you can follow people who are making the Lyra dress, or any pattern for that matter. You can see the fabrics matched to different patterns. If you check out a fabric, you might think, oh, I don't know what that's going to look like, and then underneath there'll be a thread of people who've made things in that pattern. And it's really good to see how gathers work in different fabrics, and this fabric's a great example of that, because without seeing it made up, you wouldn't know the scale of the print, and you wouldn't know how it draped for different patterns. So it's a really great place to get good inspiration. Check in again to see other tutorials, and if you have any questions, please send them to Minerva, and we can make videos that maybe help you to move on in your sewing journey.